Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here today. I want to talk to you about something that affects every single person in this room, something that has shaped your past and will absolutely determine your future. I want to talk to you about plans, not just any plans, but the plans that never make it off the ground, the dreams that die in the planning stage, the goals that dissolve before the first step is ever taken. Now, here's what I've learned after all these years of studying success and failure, of watching people rise and watching people fall. Most people don't fail because their plans were bad. They fail because their plans were doomed from the very beginning. They were dead on arrival. And if we don't understand why this happens, we're going to keep repeating the same mistakes over and over again. Let me start with a fundamental truth that most people miss. A plan without the right foundation is nothing more than a wish written on paper. See, we live in a society that loves the idea of planning. We've got planners and journals and apps and seminars all dedicated to helping us plan our lives. But very few people talk about what makes a plan actually work. Very few people talk about the invisible elements that must be in place before you even write down the first goal. Think about this for a moment. When a builder sets out to construct a magnificent building, does he start by putting up the walls? Does he begin with the beautiful windows or the impressive entrance? Of course not. He starts with something nobody ever sees. The foundation. He digs deep into the earth. He pours concrete. He makes sure that what's underground is solid enough to support what's going to be above ground. But in our lives, we want to skip this step. We want to start with the impressive stuff, the visible stuff, the stuff that other people can see, and this is where most plans begin to fail, right at the beginning. We start planning from the wrong place. We start with what we want rather than who we need to become. We start with the destination rather than the transformation that the journey requires. Let me give you a practical example. A person says, I want to be financially independent. I want to have $1 million in the bank. So they create a plan. They write it down. They break it into steps. They feel excited. But 3 months later, 6 months later, that plan is gathering dust. Why? Because they never ask themselves the fundamental questions. Am I willing to become the person who can create that kind of wealth? Am I willing to develop the disciplines, the habits, the knowledge, the character that financial independence requires? You see, every worthwhile goal demands a better version of you. Every significant achievement requires personal growth. But most people want their circumstances to change without changing themselves. They want a different result from the same person. And that's not how life works. That's not how success works. Now let me tell you about the first reason plans fail before they even begin. They're built on emotion rather than commitment. Have you noticed this? Someone gets inspired. They go to a seminar or read a book or have a conversation that moves them. They feel motivated. Their heart is racing. They can see it all so clearly. And in that emotional state, they make plans, big plans, ambitious plans. But here's what they don't realize. Emotion is a wonderful servant, but a terrible master. When you build your plans purely on emotion, you're building on shifting sand. Because emotion changes, it fluctuates. What feels incredibly important on Monday feels less urgent on Wednesday and almost irrelevant by Friday. The motivation that was so powerful in the evening disappears by morning. And when the emotion fades, and it always fades, the plan collapses because there was nothing substantial holding it up. This is why New Year's resolutions fail at such an alarming rate. People make them in a moment of emotional intensity. The calendar is turning, they feel the weight of another year passing, they feel the gap between where they are and where they want to be. And in that emotional moment, they declare their plans. They're going to lose weight, make more money, improve their relationships, learn new skills. But they haven't built commitment. They've only captured a feeling. Commitment is different from emotion. Commitment is a decision that stands independent of how you feel. Commitment says, I'm going to do this whether I feel like it or not. I'm going to continue when the initial excitement wears off. I'm going to push forward through the boring middle, through the difficult parts, through the times when nobody's watching and nobody's cheering. But here's the problem. Most people have never been taught how to build genuine commitment. They've been taught to chase feelings. Our culture celebrates passion and excitement, but it doesn't teach us much about dedication and perseverance. So when people plan, they're really just documenting their current emotional state. They're not creating a roadmap that accounts for the inevitable emotional valleys. Let me move to the second reason plans fail. They're created in isolation from reality. What do I mean by this? People make plans in a vacuum. They imagine their future without adequately considering their present. They set goals without examining their current habits, their current use of time, their current commitments, their current resources. I've seen this countless times. Someone says they want to build a business, but they haven't looked at their schedule. They're already overcommitted. They're already exhausted. They're already struggling to meet their current obligations. But they add this massive new goal on top of everything else, and they wonder why it doesn't work. They created a beautiful plan that had no room in their actual life. Or consider the person who plans to get in shape but hasn't examined their relationship with food, their daily routines, their social environment. They create a workout plan without considering that they're surrounded by people who eat poorly and avoid exercise. They're planning for success in a context designed for failure. Reality has to be your starting point, not your enemy. You can't plan effectively if you're not honest about where you are right now. And this requires something most people aren't willing to do: brutal honesty. It requires looking at your life without the filters, without the excuses, without the stories you tell yourself to feel better. When I work with people on their goals, I always start with an inventory. Not an inventory of what they want, but an inventory of what they have. Their time, their skills, their relationships, their resources, their habits, because you can't build a realistic plan until you know what you're working with. You can't chart a course until you know your starting point. But most people skip this step. They want to start planning from where they wish they were, not where they actually are. And this creates a fundamental disconnect. Their plans are based on a fantasy version of themselves, living in a fantasy version of their circumstances. When reality intrudes, and it always does, the plan can't survive because it was never designed to work in the real world. Now, the third reason plans fail is closely related. They're too focused on the outcome and not enough on the process. We live in a results-oriented culture. We celebrate the finish line, the achievement, the destination. And there's nothing wrong with knowing where you want to go. But here's what I've learned. The quality of your daily process determines the quality of your long-term results. Most plans are written like this: I want to achieve X by this date, but they should be written like this: I need to become the kind of person who does Y every single day. See the difference? One is focused on a point in the future. The other is focused on who you're becoming right now, today, in this moment. Let me illustrate this with a simple example. Two people want to write a book. The first person plans to have a finished book in 1 year. The second person plans to become a person who writes every single day. Both have plans, both have goals, but only one has a plan that accounts for the reality of how success actually happens. The first person looks at the calendar. They calculate how many pages they need. They create milestones, but they haven't created a daily practice. They haven't built the discipline. So what happens? Life gets busy. Days turn into weeks. Weeks turn into months. They keep pushing the deadline. The goal becomes a source of guilt rather than motivation. Eventually, they abandon it. The second person focuses on the process. They commit to writing for 30 minutes every morning. They don't worry about whether it's good. They don't stress about the final page count. They just focus on showing up. And something remarkable happens. The daily practice creates the outcome. The book gets written not because they planned it, but because they became a writer. They transformed their identity, and the achievement followed naturally. This is a principle that applies to every area of life. You don't get rich by planning to have money. You get rich by becoming the kind of person who creates value, saves consistently, invests wisely, and thinks long term. You don't get healthy by planning to lose weight. You get healthy by becoming the kind of person who exercises regularly, eats nutritiously, and takes care of their body. But our plans rarely reflect this truth. We're obsessed with the destination and impatient with the journey. We want the results without the transformation. We want the crown without the character development. And so our plans fail because they're architecturally flawed. They're designed for an outcome rather than a process. The fourth reason plans fail before they begin is this: they require resources we haven't developed. Every goal demands something from us. It demands time, energy, knowledge, skill, money, relationships, or some combination of these. But most people make plans without honestly assessing what resources the plan will require and whether they currently have access to those resources. Think about it. Someone decides they want to start a business. They write a business plan. They get excited about the potential. But they haven't developed the skills of sales, marketing, financial management, or leadership. They haven't built the network they'll need. They haven't saved the capital that will be required. They haven't cultivated the resilience that entrepreneurship demands. Their plan is beautiful on paper, but it's like trying to build a house without lumber, nails, or tools. Here's what successful people understand. Before you can execute your plan, you need to invest in developing the resources your plan requires. Sometimes this means your plan needs to be a two-phase plan. Phase 1, develop the resources. Phase 2, execute the vision. But most people want to skip phase 1. They want to jump straight to execution with inadequate preparation. Let me be very clear about something. This isn't about having everything figured out before you start. That's impossible, and it's a recipe for never starting at all. But there's a difference between perfect preparation and adequate preparation. There's a difference between having every resource and having the critical resources you need to take the first meaningful steps. If your plan requires you to work 10 hours a day, but you've never demonstrated the ability to focus for even 2 hours at a time, you don't have the resource of discipline that your plan demands. If your plan requires you to invest $10,000, but you haven't developed the habit of saving even $100 a month, you don't have the financial resource your plan requires. If your plan requires you to build a team, but you've never learned how to communicate effectively or inspire others, you don't have the leadership resource you need. The plan might be brilliant, but without the resources, it's just fantasy. And here's the hard truth. Developing Developing resources takes time. It takes patience. It takes consistent effort over an extended period. But we live in an instant gratification culture. We want the results now. We want success now. We're not willing to spend the months or years developing ourselves into people who have what it takes to execute our plans successfully. This brings me to the fifth reason plans fail. They're disconnected from our values. Now, this is subtle, but it's crucial. Your values are the deeply held beliefs and priorities that guide your life, whether you're consciously aware of them or not. They're what you actually care about, as demonstrated by how you spend your time and energy, not what you say you care about. Many plans fail because they're based on what we think we should want rather than what we actually value. We create plans around goals that sound impressive or that other people would approve of, but they don't align with what genuinely matters to us. And when there's a disconnect between our plans and our values, the plans always lose. Let me give you an example. Someone creates a plan to climb the corporate ladder, to reach the executive level, to maximize their income. On paper, it looks great, but their deepest values are actually around family time, creative expression, and personal freedom. The plan they've created directly conflicts with their values. So what happens? Subconsciously, they sabotage their own plan. They procrastinate. They find excuses. They don't follow through, not because they're lazy or weak, but because their inner self recognizes that achieving this goal would actually make them less happy, less fulfilled, less aligned with what they truly care about. This is why self-knowledge is so important before you plan. You need to understand what you actually value, not what you've been told to value. You need to know what genuinely energizes you, what brings you satisfaction, what kind of life you want to build. Because if your plans aren't in harmony with your values, you're creating internal conflict. You're setting yourself up to fight against yourself. And here's something most people don't realize. Your values will always win. Always. You can override them temporarily through willpower and discipline, but over the long term, your true values will direct your life. So if your plan requires you to violate your values consistently, that plan is doomed. It might take a week or a month or a year, but eventually it will collapse under the weight of internal contradiction. The sixth reason plans fail is that they're created without considering obstacles. Most people plan for success, but they don't plan for difficulty. They imagine the path will be smooth. They think about how great it will feel when they achieve their goal, but they don't seriously consider what will get in their way. This is where most plans become unrealistic. They're built on best-case scenarios. They assume everything will go according to plan. They don't account for setbacks, obstacles, challenges, or failures. And when these inevitable difficulties arise, people are shocked. They're unprepared, they don't know how to respond, so they quit. Let me tell you something I've learned from studying successful people. They all plan for problems. They anticipate obstacles. They think through what could go wrong and how they'll handle it. This doesn't make them negative or pessimistic. It makes them prepared. It makes them resilient. When you're creating a plan, you need to ask yourself, what obstacles am I likely to face? What has stopped me in the past? What external circumstances might get in my way? What internal obstacles, fear, doubt, old habits will I need to overcome? And then you need to plan your response to these obstacles ahead of time. This is what psychologists call implementation intentions. It's the practice of creating if-then plans. If this obstacle arises, then I will respond this way. If I feel like quitting, then I will remind myself of these reasons. If I encounter this setback, then I will take these specific actions. This kind of planning dramatically increases your chances of success because you're not leaving your response to chance. You're not relying on making good decisions in difficult moments. You're making the decision now when you're clear-headed and motivated about how you'll handle future challenges. But most people don't do this. They create plans that only work if everything goes perfectly. And since life never goes perfectly, their plans fail at the first sign of real difficulty. The seventh reason plans fail is perhaps the most overlooked. They're built on someone else's definition of success. We're constantly bombarded with images and messages about what success should look like. The big house, the fancy car, the prestigious job, the impressive title, the luxury vacation. And without even realizing it, we absorb these definitions. We start planning our lives around goals that aren't actually ours. I've met countless people who achieved what they thought was success, only to feel empty. They reached the goal, they got the promotion, made the money, bought the things, but it didn't bring the satisfaction they expected. Why? Because they were chasing someone else's dream. They were following a script written by society, by their parents, by their peers, by advertising, by social media. When your plan is based on external definitions of success, you're building on a weak foundation. Because even if you achieve the goal, it won't fulfill you. And at some level, your psyche knows this. So you don't bring your full energy to the plan. You don't fully commit. You sabotage yourself in small ways because deep down, you're not convinced that achieving this goal will actually make your life better. This is why it's so important important to get clear on what success means to you personally. Not success is defined by your industry or your culture or your family. Success is defined by your own values, your own vision, your own sense of what makes life meaningful and worthwhile. When your plans align with your personal definition of success, you bring a different level of energy and commitment to them. You're not doing it to impress others or meet external expectations. You're doing it because it genuinely matters to you. Now let me talk about the 8th reason plans fail. They lack accountability structures. Most plans are private affairs. We create them in our minds or write them in journals that nobody else sees. We keep our goals to ourselves, and this creates a problem. Without external accountability, it's too easy to let ourselves off the hook. Here's what happens. You create a plan, you commit to yourself, but then life gets difficult. You face resistance, you don't feel like following through, and in that moment, you have a choice. If nobody knows about your plan, if nobody is checking on your progress, if there are no consequences for quitting, it becomes very easy to rationalize giving up. You tell yourself you'll start again tomorrow, next week, next month. You lower your standards, you revise your goals, and slowly, quietly, your plan dies. But when you have accountability, when someone else knows your plan, when you've committed publicly, when you have someone checking in on your progress, when there are real consequences for not following through, everything changes. You show up differently. You push through resistance because you don't want to let others down. You maintain your standards because someone is watching. This doesn't mean you need to broadcast every goal to the world, but you need some structure of accountability. Maybe it's a mentor, a coach, a friend, a mastermind group, a formal program. Whatever it is, you need to build it into your plan from the beginning, because without it, your plan is vulnerable to your weakest moments, your lowest energy, your most doubtful days. The 9th reason plans fail is that they try to change too much too fast. We're impatient. We want transformation overnight. So we create plans that require us to overhaul our entire lives simultaneously. We're going to wake up earlier, exercise daily, eat perfectly, work harder, learn new skills, improve our relationships, and develop new habits all at the same time. And for a few days, maybe even a few weeks, we maintain this unsustainable pace. We run on willpower and initial enthusiasm, but willpower is a limited resource. It depletes. And when it does, everything collapses. We can't maintain all these changes at once. We get overwhelmed, we burn out, we quit everything and return to our old patterns, often feeling worse than when we started because now we have one more failure to add to our history. Here's a principle that's crucial to understand. Sustainable change happens incrementally. It happens through small, consistent improvements over time. It happens through building one habit at a time until it becomes automatic, then adding another. It happens through focusing your limited willpower on 1 or 2 key changes rather than spreading it across 10 different areas. But our plans rarely reflect this wisdom. We're attracted to dramatic transformations. We want to be completely different people by next month. So we create plans that require superhuman discipline and perfect execution. And when we inevitably fall short of these unrealistic standards, we interpret it as personal failure rather than recognizing that the plan itself was flawed. If you want your plan to succeed, it needs to be achievable given your current capacity. It needs to stretch you, yes, but not break you. It needs to challenge you without overwhelming you. And this usually means doing less than you want to do. It means being more patient than you want to be. It means accepting that meaningful change is a marathon, not a sprint. The 10th and perhaps most critical reason plans fail is this. They're disconnected from a compelling why. Your plan might have a clear what you want to achieve. It might even have a decent how you plan to achieve it. But if it doesn't have a powerful why, a deep, emotional, meaningful reason that connects to something larger than yourself, it won't survive the difficult times. Let me explain what I mean. Every significant goal will require sacrifice. It will require you to do things you don't feel like doing. It will require you to say no to immediate pleasures in favor of long-term benefits. It will require you to persist through failure and disappointment. And in those moments, the only thing that will keep you going is a why that's strong enough to outweigh the difficulty. If your why is superficial, if it's just about having more money or looking better or impressing others, it won't be enough. When things get hard, these surface-level motivations evaporate. But if your why is connected to something deeper, to providing for your family, to making a meaningful contribution, to becoming the person you're capable of being, to leaving a legacy, to solving a problem you deeply care about, that why will sustain you through the valleys. Most plans fail because the why was never clearly articulated or deeply felt. The person knew what they wanted but never took the time to understand why they wanted it. They never connected their goal to their values, their purpose, their sense of meaning. And without this connection, the goal becomes just another item on a to-do list, easily abandoned when something easier or more appealing comes along. So before you finalize any plan, you need to dig deep into your why. You need to ask yourself, why does this matter? Why am I willing to sacrifice for this? What will achieving this goal make possible? How will it change my life? Who will benefit beyond me? What purpose will it serve? And you need to keep asking why until you hit something that moves you emotionally, something that creates a visceral response, something that you know you can return to in difficult moments. Now let me bring all of this together because these 10 reasons aren't separate. They're interconnected. They reinforce each other. A plan built on emotion rather than commitment is likely to also ignore reality, focus only on outcomes, and lack accountability. A plan disconnected from values is likely to also be based on someone else's definition of success and lack a compelling why. What you need to understand is that planning effectively is a skill. It's not something most of us were taught. We weren't given courses in school on how to create plans that actually work. We weren't taught how to build commitment, develop resources, anticipate obstacles, or construct accountability systems. So we've been making plans using the limited knowledge we picked up along the way, often repeating the same mistakes over and over. But here's the good news. You can learn this skill. You can become someone who creates plans that work, but it requires you to approach planning differently than you have before. It requires you to slow down, to think more deeply, to be more honest, to be more thorough. When you sit down to create your next plan, don't start by writing your goals. Start by examining yourself. Ask yourself, am I emotionally ready for this, or do I need to build genuine commitment first? Am I being honest about my current reality? Do I understand the process this will require, not just the outcome I want? Do I have the resources I need, or do I need to develop them first? Does this align with my values? Have I anticipated the obstacles? Is this really my definition of success? Do I have accountability built in? Am I trying to change too much too fast? Do I have a compelling why? These questions might seem like they're slowing you down. They might feel like they're getting in the way of taking action. But I promise you, the time you invest in answering these questions honestly is the most valuable time you can spend, because a plan that's built on solid foundations will carry you further than 10 plans built on sand. And here's something else you need to understand. The planning process itself is transformative. When you engage with these questions deeply, you're not just creating a plan. You're developing self-awareness. You're building wisdom. You're becoming the kind of person who succeeds not through luck, but through thoughtful preparation and execution. Most people treat planning as an event. They sit down once, write some goals, and expect that to be enough. But effective planning is a practice. It's something you return to regularly. You review your plan. You adjust based on what you're learning. You refine your approach. You stay flexible enough to adapt while remaining committed to your core objectives.